The transit shuttle's landing struts hissed as they met the regolith of the outer rim waypoint, settling into the dust with a gentle shudder that spoke of precision engineering long after the pilot systems had gone dark. Mara unstrapped her harness and pushed the cabin door open, stepping out into air above. The sky was a canvas of sun-drenched azure, the light spilling over the landscape in broad, golden ribbons that warmed the shoulders of her tunic. The ping from the medical automaton had led her here, a high-priority signal cutting through the static of the interstellar health grid to mark this coordinate as the next point of stewardship. As she lifted her diagnostic kit, the view ahead revealed not the sterile geometry she might have expected from a waystation interface, but service paths that wound gently into the surrounding terrain, their edges softened by overgrown vegetation that crept up toward the structural foundations. She moved off the landing pad, her boots crunching softly on gravel interspersed with resilient mosses and low-lying shrubs. Mara followed the line of waymark pylons, their surfaces etched with the same insignia found on the medical automaton's chassis, guiding her through the greenery toward the sorter's housing. The structure rose from the foliage like a dormant sentinel, its intake vents and sensor arrays obscured by the encroaching growth. As she drew closer, the hum of the environment shifted. There was no active thrum of machinery, only the whisper of wind passing over weathered metal and the rustle of leaves. Reaching the base of the structure, Mara deployed her field scanner, sweeping the arc of the sorter's housing. The initial visual scan confirmed what her eyes had already suspected regarding the state of the harmonic emitters. Heavy mineral buildup coated the exposed arrays, a thick crust of silicate deposits that had formed over cycles of inactivity. Her scanner's readout flickered with amber warning glyphs, indicating that this heavy accumulation was severe enough to dampen any residual resonance within the system, silencing the faint hum of dormant potential. The blockage was preventing baseline ecological calibration, effectively muting the sorter's ability to respond to the harmonic variance that signaled community health metrics across the grid. Mara knelt beside the emitter array, her fingers tracing the edge of a particularly dense cluster of deposits. She could feel the lack of vibration through the soles of her boots. The system was entirely dormant, locked out by its own physical state. A physical obstruction could not be bypassed by software protocols alone. She tapped her wrist display, pulling up the calibration matrix derived from the climate archive. The matrix showed that without clearing the mineral load, any attempt to engage a handshake protocol would result in feedback oscillations that could damage the delicate modulation circuits of her resonator. "Clearance first," she murmured, her voice steady and thoughtful. She adjusted her stance, ensuring the harmonic resonator at her hip was set to active modulation mode. Mara knew that targeted harmonic clearance would be necessary to dissolve the mineral bonds without stressing the underlying architecture of the sorter. She needed to match the resonance frequency of the accretion while maintaining a precise phase margin that respected the dormant hardware's strict tolerance limits, ensuring no stress would propagate through the coupling matrix. The objective was clear: locate and assess the current state to prepare for restoration. She moved around the housing to the primary intake section, her scanner focusing on the core alignment mechanisms. The visual data resolved into sharp clarity as she adjusted the gain. There, at the heart of the sorter's mechanism, lay the root cause of the system's stillness. Mara leaned in, her breath catching slightly as the diagnostic overlay highlighted the structural anomaly. The sorter's primary misalignment was caused by crystalline mineral accretion blocking its intake vents. The crystals had grown inward from the periphery, fusing into a rigid lattice that jammed the calibration gears and sealed the airflow channels necessary for harmonic transfer. Mara noted the pattern carefully, understanding that correcting this misalignment would require not just forceful clearing, but a gentle retuning of the sorter's internal geometry to accommodate the new mineral reality, honoring the builder's preference for adaptive partnership even in the face of geological change. Mara stood before the blocked intake vents, her diagnostic kit humming softly against her hip. The Harmonic sorter housing loomed ahead, a cathedral of weathered alloy and overgrown service paths bathed in the steady amber light of the twin suns. She had navigated the vegetation with practiced care, but the machinery itself demanded more than gentle passage. The intake grates were fused by decades of mineral buildup, and the primary access panel displayed a dormant crimson warning. She knelt, routing a slender probe from her kit into the auxiliary maintenance port. With a quiet series of clicks, she bypassed the safety locks, carefully decoupling the structural alarms that would have otherwise drawn unnecessary attention to the site. The heavy door groaned, then slid open with reluctant grace, revealing the interior control niche. Inside, the air was cool and still, carrying the faint ozone scent of dormant circuitry. Mara activated her helmet lamp, its beam cutting through the gloom to illuminate the walls. They were not bare metal, but covered in intricate etched schematics, faded by time yet remarkably clear. She moved closer, tracing the lines with a gloved finger. The diagrams outlined a system designed for adaptive partnership rather than rigid command. Arrows flowed between geological layers and atmospheric sensors, illustrating a network that measured soil moisture, tracked pollinator migration patterns, and adjusted mineral distribution accordingly. The builders had not engineered this sorter to dominate its environment. They had built it to listen. The control niche itself was a testament to thoughtful engineering, featuring redundant cooling channels and manual override levers that had clearly never been intended for regular use. Mara noted how every switch was placed within natural reach, prioritizing human ergonomics over machine efficiency. This was not mere aesthetics. It was a philosophical statement etched into metal. Mara pulled up her archival data on her wrist display, overlaying the etched schematics with the cooperative stewardship principles she had uncovered in the medical automaton logs. The correlation was immediate and undeniable. The Harmonic sorter expected ecological feedback, not direct frequency injection. Her initial approach would have been to force a calibration pulse straight into the emitter array, but the diagrams made it clear that such a method would only trigger defensive shutdown protocols. The machine required a dialogue, a slow exchange of data that mirrored the natural cycles it was meant to support. She unclipped her active modulation resonator from her belt and connected it to the sorter's external archive port. The device whirred softly, its output shifting into a careful harmonic simulation of community health metrics. Mara adjusted the dials, matching the simulated feedback to the ecological parameters etched into the walls. She cross-referenced the secondary data streams with her display, watching as the harmonic variance aligned perfectly with the archived climate archive matrix. The system was asking for validation, not command. Each oscillation she simulated mirrored the rhythmic breathing of the surrounding canopy, proving that technology and environment were meant to move in tandem. Dust motes danced in the light as the resonator began to broadcast a gentle, oscillating rhythm. The sorter responded not with a sudden surge of power, but with a quiet acknowledgement. Internal gears engaged with deliberate patience, and the archive port indicator shifted from dormant gray to steady amber. She verified the grid load through her diagnostics, confirming that the stabilized environmental tap provided sufficient capacity for this array calibration without straining the local network. Mara leaned in as the extraction sequence began. A fragmented calibration matrix scrolled across her display, each line confirming what the schematics had already suggested. She monitored the feedback loops closely, ensuring the resonator did not drift into harmonic dissonance. The archive port responded with a soft chime, releasing the calibration data in manageable packets rather than a single overwhelming burst. The sorter required cooperative harmonic input to realign its internal emitters. Manual override was not merely discouraged, it was architecturally impossible without compromising the ecological balance the system was built to maintain. She logged the findings, feeling a familiar sense of quiet satisfaction settle over her. The path forward was clear, and it demanded patience rather than force. Mara stood in the dimly lit control niche, her fingers tracing the cold alloy of the primary coupling port. The air here was still, carrying the faint metallic tang of dormant machinery and the quiet hum of the stabilized canopy environmental grid that sustained them all. She adjusted her harness, feeling the familiar weight of her harmonic resonator against her chest. The device had been active for hours now, modulating simulated community health metrics to keep the feedback oscillations within safe parameters. With a steady breath, she connected the coupling cable. A soft click echoed in the confined space as the connection seated perfectly. Power flowed from the grid into her equipment, routing through the resonator's internal capacitors and preparing for the realignment sequence she had spent days cross-referencing on the sorter schematics. She double-checked the alignment parameters, ensuring every frequency matched the low-frequency emitter array targeted at the mineral deposits below. She activated the targeting sequence. The resonator whined softly as it translated her input into a precise frequency sweep aimed at the external emitter array. On the diagnostic display, waveforms began to climb and align. Mara initiated frequency targeting on the intake vents, watching the numerical readouts shift in real time. But the sorter did not respond with the smooth, welcoming resonance she had anticipated. Instead, a sharp warning tone cut through the quiet immediately, vibrating against her ribs. The display flickered, cycling through amber diagnostics before settling on a stark crimson border. She watched the primary oscillator dip, realizing the mechanical components were intact but restrained by an older logic layer. Mara paused, her hands hovering over the interface. She tapped the secondary query key, pulling up the legacy security protocols etched into the system's core architecture. The text scrolled slowly across the screen, written in the precise, adaptive language of the original architects. It was clear enough for anyone who understood their philosophy. The security layer demanded multi-point ecological feedback to bypass. The machine would not simply accept a direct calibration pulse from a single source. It required a broader context, a living network of environmental data to prove that the realignment would support the surrounding ecosystem rather than exploit it. She recalled the climate archive matrix she had decoded earlier, noting how every dormant way station operated on the same principle of adaptive partnership. The diagnostics listed specific thresholds for soil moisture, atmospheric pressure, and local biodiversity indices, all of which remained unregistered in this isolated sector. To proceed, her simulation sequence would need to weave together those disparate metrics, creating a synthetic but accurate representation of the surrounding canopy's breathing rhythm. She exhaled slowly, recognizing the elegance of the design. Direct injection was exactly what would trigger the rejection. If she forced the sequence further, the sudden demand for power could strain the already balanced grid, potentially destabilizing the medical automaton handshake that had just been verified across the outer rim. Regional expectations demanded careful calibration, and Mara had no intention of compromising the interstellar health network for a quick fix. She immediately severed the direct injection pathway, routing her equipment into a passive monitoring state to prevent any grid strain. The warning tone faded to a gentle pulse as the system held its position, waiting. She leaned back against the console, reviewing the diagnostic logs and noting the system's clear demand for environmental variance. She traced the display edge, already mapping how to synthesize the missing ecological data points without overloading dormant sensors. The resonator's display shifted into a soft indigo hue as Mara adjusted the modulation dial. She watched the simulated health harmonics ripple across the screen, carefully balancing the frequencies to match the subtle oscillations of the surrounding atmosphere. Every adjustment required patience, cultivated through years of repairing forgotten machines across remote settlements. The archival records she had integrated earlier confirmed that the architects never designed their infrastructure to dominate or extract. They built systems that listened first, responding only when the local environment offered clear signals of stability. This way station was no different. Its dormant processors were simply waiting for a chorus rather than a solo, a testament to the enduring belief that technology should amplify ecological balance rather than override it. The sorter's systems reject the initial calibration pulse, citing insufficient ecological variance and demanding a broader environmental handshake. The warning tone lingered like a bruise on the air, its harsh frequency dissolving into the quiet hum of the dormant machinery. Mara stepped back from the control niche, her boots crunching softly over gravel that had seen no footfall in centuries. The sorter lay before her, a silent giant of oxidized alloy and shuttered apertures, its rejection protocol locking out any attempt at brute force calibration. She had routed power correctly, she had aligned the emitters to the low-frequency parameters of the mineral deposits, yet the system held firm. The legacy logic was clear: raw energy would only stress the grid. What the sorter demanded was not force, but context. It wanted variance. She realized the rejection was an instruction. The sorter waited for a broader handshake, woven from living data. Mara unslung her tool pack and checked the array of portable sensors clipped to her belt. The surrounding cultivated landscape offered the answer, a tapestry of dormant monitoring stations woven into the overgrown service paths she had navigated earlier. If the sorter needed ecological context, she would provide it. She moved away from the waystation interface, descending the gentle slope toward the terraced gardens where the local stewards maintained the soil balance. She knelt at the first station, a moss-capped pillar half buried in roots, and jacked her datapad into the port. The display flickered, revealing dormant telemetry waiting to be woken. She adjusted the gain on the thermal probe, feeling the subtle warmth radiating from the stone as it absorbed the morning sun, then tapped the command to bind the node to her resonator's buffer. One by one, she relocated the nodes, treating each connection with the care of a gardener tending young shoots. She anchored them in active soil pockets where microbial activity spiked after the morning dew, and positioned atmospheric units near the updraft vents that carried spores from the canopy above. Each connection sent a pulse of life back into her system, the data stream swelling with complexity. The readings were chaotic at first, fluctuating humidity levels, shifting mineral density gradients, the subtle thermal breath of the planet, but Mara saw the underlying pattern emerging from the noise. She returned to her workbench beneath the sorter's shadow and opened the resonator's modulation interface, routing sensor streams into the harmonic generator through a cascading filter array. She adjusted the parameters on the rippling display, amplifying differential signals to mark true ecological variance. She was no longer building a bridge of power. She was weaving a tapestry of variance, converting the planet's subtle breathing into a coherent acoustic map that mirrored the adaptive partnership the builders had championed. With the translation matrix locked, Mara initiated the broadcast. The resonator shifted its output, pushing the environmental data through the sorter's transmitter array. For a moment, nothing happened. The air remained still, and the machine stood immovable against her will. Then, a low thrum vibrated through the ground, rising in pitch until it matched the cadence of the sensors feeding from the soil. The sorter shuddered. Shuttered apertures groaned as they realigned, not with the rigid click of mechanical locking, but with the fluid grace of an organism adjusting to its environment. The dormant gray indicators along the emitter housing began to pulse. A ripple of amber light spread from the intake vents outward, washing over the oxidized metal and settling into a warm, receptive glow. The system was no longer rejecting her. It was listening, absorbing the variance as fuel for its recalibration. Mara watched the readouts climb on her datapad. The variance parameters stabilized, locking into the sorter's acceptance threshold. A stable harmonic bridge formed between the landscape and the machine, carrying ecological metrics through the transmitter array like blood returning to a waking limb. Feeder lines hissed as pressure equalized, mineral deposits shifting under her newly established calibration matrix. The air around the waystation thickened with the scent of ozone and damp earth, the resonance settling into a rhythm that felt less like machinery and more like a heartbeat. Mara exhaled, her shoulders relaxing as the feedback oscillations smoothed into a steady state. The sorter was responsive now, its internal processes aligning with the broader network she had helped activate. She stood at the threshold of the realignment, the harmonic bridge holding firm beneath her hands, ready to guide the machine toward the deeper work of restoration. Mara stood within the harmonic sorter core chamber, her focus fixed on the resonance matrix hovering above the central plinth. The harmonic bridge she had established remained stable, a steady stream of consistent ecological metrics flowing into the sorter's core matrix. Below her gaze, thick mineral accretion coating the internal conduits began to shimmer under the sustained harmonic frequency. It was not a violent dissolution, but a gradual unbinding. The stubborn silicates loosened their grip on the ancient alloy, flaking away in fine, iridescent dust that drifted harmlessly into the collection sumps. The silicates didn't just crumble, they sang a faint, high-pitched overtone as their molecular bonds relaxed, contributing to the harmonic texture Mara monitored on her wrist display. The air grew crisp as the buildup cleared, revealing the pristine geometry of the engineering beneath. She moved to the emitter array, her fingers dancing across the tactile interface. Drawing upon the cooperative calibration matrix she had extracted from the control niche walls earlier, Mara adjusted the angles of the phased emitters. Every angle calculation honored the builder's insistence that infrastructure must yield to ecological context rather than dominating it. The machine was learning to listen as much as it was broadcasting, a subtle dance of input and output that Mara guided with gentle nudges of the control manifold. Each shift was deliberate, aligning the output vectors with the adaptive partnership principles etched into the structure decades ago. As she fine-tuned the alignment, the hum of the machinery deepened, shifting from a tentative probing tone to a robust, rhythmic thrum that matched the natural oscillation of the surrounding landscape. The sorter responded instantly, its internal logic accepting the new parameters as an extension of its original design rather than an intrusion. A heavy mechanical engagement clunked through the chamber floor, signaling that the realignment sequence had reached its physical endpoint. The gears locked into their calibrated positions, and the core matrix stabilized. Mara monitored the power readouts closely as the sorter completed its cycle. Excess energy built within the capacitors, but instead of threatening a load spike, the system seamlessly vented the surplus directly into the atmosphere through the thermal dispersion vents on the upper rim. The thermal dispersion vents opened with the grace of a blooming flower, releasing the heat in expanding concentric waves that merged with the ambient winds. No alarm sounded on her console. The load remained flat, proving the sorter's ability to self-regulate without burdening the surrounding infrastructure, a testament to the sustainable design cycles Mara relied upon. The release was visible only as a faint, harmless shimmer in the sun-drenched air outside, leaving the local grid entirely untouched. The integration felt seamless, a perfect exchange between machine and environment. With the mechanical engagement confirmed, Mara turned her attention to the formal verification process. She accessed the Regional Stewardship Council uplink node via her portable console, initiating the handshake pulse to document realignment outcomes. The connection established with the familiar warmth of a collegial link. She could almost imagine the Stewardship Council members acknowledging the update across the distance, their professional rapport reinforced by the tangible success of this repair. The data stream flowed smoothly. The sorter's adaptive resource-sharing protocol reported fully active and synchronized with the wider network. Across the interface, the Council's diagnostic lights pulsed in affirmation, confirming that the ore sorter was now a functional node within the interstellar health grid. The handshake pulse completed its cycle, locking the sorter's status into the permanent archive, ensuring that future stewards would recognize this node as fully operational and integrated. The legacy of cooperative stewardship was no longer just archival theory, but an operational reality, binding this way station to the regional community through shared ecological balance. Mara stepped back from the console, watching the final readouts settle. The intake vents below the plinth cleared completely under the lingering harmonic frequency, their apertures free of obstruction and drawing in fresh air with efficient silence. The core matrix hummed at a steady baseline resonance, the sound rich and warm, awaiting only her final diagnostic confirmation to close the loop. She made a note to document the realignment outcomes thoroughly before preparing for the next Waypoint transit, satisfied that this node was restored to its intended purpose of nurturing the land and supporting those who tended it. The harmonic sorter settled into its new rhythm with a sound like wind moving through glass chimes. Mara stood at the edge of the service path, watching calibrated streams of nutrient-rich particulate drift from the intake vents onto the surrounding soil. Her handheld scanner chimed steadily, confirming what her eyes already told her. Soil viability metrics were climbing past baseline thresholds, and the atmospheric balance had steadied into a delicate equilibrium. The derelict orbital way station interface no longer felt like a relic of abandonment, but rather a sleeping garden finally allowed to breathe. She tapped her data slate, logging the restoration outcomes with meticulous care. Every percentage point of regained viability was a quiet testament to cooperative calibration rather than brute force engineering. The inverted vector held perfectly, translating environmental feedback into gentle corrective harmonics that encouraged growth instead of demanding compliance. Moving toward her field workstation, Mara unpacked the portable archival rig and laid it on the sun-warmed stone of an old maintenance plinth. The canopy light filtered through the overhead structure in dappled gold, casting long shadows across the overgrown service corridors. She initiated the regional transmission sequence, linking her slate to the Stewardship Council Transit Network logs. The update flowed smoothly, detailing the sorter active status and confirming that the Harmonic Variance protocol had successfully integrated with the local ecological grid. The Council acknowledgement pinged back almost instantly, warm and collegial, noting the expanded capacity for future Waypoint coordination. Mara smiled faintly, appreciating how seamlessly the machinery complemented the community rather than dictating to it. She routed a secondary feed from her resonator into the sorting array, watching how the simulated community health harmonics layered over the existing grid without causing feedback oscillations. The architecture rewarded patience, responding to measured adjustments rather than rapid overrides. As she cross-referenced the sorter schematics with her harmonic simulation sequence, the primary transmitter array emitted a soft, resonant chime. The harmonic variance shifted from operational feedback into something distinctly archival. Mara adjusted her listening gain and watched the waveform stabilize on her display. It was a secondary broadcast, deliberately triggered by the sorter's successful activation. The data stream unfolded in clear, elegant glyphs before resolving into spoken cadence, a voice preserved across centuries, calm and measured. It spoke not of conquest or territorial mapping, but of shared ecological recovery. The builders had explicitly designed these nodes to prioritize coordinated restoration over expansion, weaving resource distribution into a wider tapestry of interstellar health. The broadcast outlined how dormant infrastructure responded only to cooperative calibration, rejecting isolation in favor of synchronized stewardship across vast distances. Mara leaned back against the plinth, letting the archival philosophy wash over her. The implications were profound. She had spent years treating each dormant way station as an isolated puzzle, but the broadcast revealed a unified legacy spanning the sector. Adaptive stewardship was not merely a maintenance manual, it was a living framework meant to be shared across generations and settlements. The harmonic sorter continued its quiet work behind her, distributing calibrated resources while the secondary signal mapped out a network of complementary nodes waiting for synchronized recalibration. Each coordinate pulsed with potential, suggesting that the true scale of the builder's vision had only just begun to surface. The glyphs on her display shifted into topographical overlays, mapping dormant harvesters and atmospheric scrubbers across 3 neighboring systems. Each node pulsed in slow, deliberate intervals, waiting for the next steward to complete the sequence. It was a quiet invitation, woven into the metal and memory of the way station. She secured her field workstation, sliding the data slate into its reinforced pouch and disconnecting the portable power couplings. The sunlight shifted across the interface, warming the stone as the sorter hum deepened into a steady, restorative pulse. Mara reviewed the builder's explicit preference for shared recovery one last time, noting how every archival directive pointed toward coordinated restoration rather than solitary achievement. The new pathway was clear, and the transit coordinates aligned with her preparations. She packed the final calibration tools, acknowledged the coordinated directive humming through the waystation veins, and turned her attention to the next waypoint waiting on the horizon.